Before we begin, I want to share a resource that can make your divorce process far easier and much less stressful. It's Hello Divorce. Hello Divorce gives you a guided, step-by-step path through your divorce with clear instructions, simple online tools, and support from real legal and coaching professionals when you need it. You get help with paperwork, access to affordable legal advice, and a process that is designed to save you money, reduce conflict, and keep you informed every step of the way. They've created a special page just for Divorce and Beyond listeners. Visit hellodivorce.com/Susan to explore their plans, pricing, and resources so you can see exactly what fits your situation. If you want a clearer, calmer, more empowered way to move through your divorce, start at hellodivorce.com/Susan.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
Speaking as someone who was in that position, as young Matthew, what I would have appreciated a lot more was much more listening and much more empathy, right? Because most of the mental health professionals were coming into our world with agendas, preset ideas, preconceived notions. They were clearly trying to fit me into the box of whatever was going to happen according to this thing that had nothing to do with really deeply just being and relating to me. I would have appreciated much more listening and empathy because that might have unlocked something meaningful in the therapist actually getting what was really going on with me.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond.
Welcome back to Divorce and Beyond. I'm Susan Guthrie, and today's episode is one you truly do not want to miss. Last week, we re-aired the #1 episode of Divorce and Beyond of all time on this podcast. My conversation with Bill Eddy about his book, Splitting. We did that very intentionally because it is the perfect lead-in to today's discussion. Bill is back with us, and joining him is author and creator Matthew Tower, whose new book, Love Wars: Clash of the Parents, gives us something we rarely get in this field, the inside experience of a child living through a high-conflict divorce. Matthew grew up moving between two volatile households, navigating emotional unpredictability, parentification, and the constant pressure to choose sides. His story is raw, powerful, and at times hard to hear, but it is also illuminating. It shows exactly what children absorb when conflict spirals and how it shapes them for years to come. And there is no one better than Bill Eddy to help us unpack those patterns and translate Matthew's lived experience into insight and guidance for you. If you are going through divorce, thinking about divorce, or co-parenting with someone who is high conflict, this episode will give you clarity, compassion, and strategies that genuinely change the dynamic for your family. So let's dive in. Well, Matthew and Bill, I have been looking forward to taping this episode. I think that this is one of those episodes that's really going to be a standout because, well, for a few reasons. First, because we know that so many listeners are going through divorce, and one of their main concerns is their children and helping their children, supporting their children in the process. We know one of the most Googled things is, how do I not let divorce mess up my children, right? And then number two, Bill, frankly, They love hearing from you. They're going to be so excited that you're back. You know, you have some of the top episodes. Actually, you have the top episode. So to be able to be here with you and with you, Matthew, I'm just delighted. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. I'm always glad to be on with you. And I'm glad to be on with Matthew because we met about 15 years ago, I think, and he had a story to tell that I thought needed to be told to people going through divorce and professionals. So I'm excited to be here, and I'll pass it to Matthew.
It's such an honor to be here with you, Susan. You have a fantastic podcast. I've actually listened to several of Bill's episodes on your show. And yes, Bill, I met you through your phenomenal book, Splitting, which was the first and only book I've ever read that helped me understand my parents' divorce. So that was a professional and analytical tool that I'd been looking for years. And so I was inspired to send you my manuscript. You read it, and then you offered some editorial input on it. And and so now the book is finally out, and it's such an honor to be here with both of you to talk about it.
That's amazing. I didn't know the backstory of how the two of you met. I'm not surprised that it's the book Splitting. Bill knows the story, but I found the book as a young divorce professional when I was going through my first high conflict divorce and didn't know what I was dealing with, didn't understand the dynamic, and had never had a case like this. I think I was probably 5 or 6 years into my divorce practice, and someone was like, "Oh, you've got to read Bill Eddy, Get Splitting." And so not the same, but a little bit the same. And coincidentally, listeners, or maybe not coincidentally, Bill's #1 episode of all time on the podcast, which I will link to in the show notes for you, of course, is on his book Splitting. So it is a lifesaver, and I'm not surprised that, you know, you probably maybe were reading it and had those moments, as people say, of, oh, yes, that's what was happening, or that explains it. But I am assuming you found that book as an adult.
Oh, yes, absolutely, Susan. I actually started writing my memoir, Love Wars, Clash of the Parents, in 1998, if you can believe that. So the first lines were written 27 years ago, and I just published it last month in October. So a very long journey. Okay. And I was doing rewriting, and I had other professional projects I was working on, and I was kind of coming back to it every now and then. And I had the second draft in hand when I discovered Splitting, which was in the early 2010s, if I remember correctly. It's a little faint now. It's about 13, 15 years ago, as Bill said. And so I emailed Bill and said, "Hey, I loved your book. I'd like to send you a copy of my manuscript so you can see the ways in which this potentially overlaps with your professional perspective." And reading Splitting, I just was going down the list and saying, "Oh my gosh, that explains it. That explains it. Now I understand what a high conflict personality is. Now I understand what borderline and narcissistic traits are, and how those show up in a relationship, and how that can affect the kid who's me." So,
yeah, and certainly did throughout your childhood. And that's what the book's about, just to sort of make clear for the listeners. I've read the book start to finish. It's I mentioned this to both of you just a moment ago. It's not an easy read. It's not that it's long. It's not that it's very well written and all. It's hard because it's very emotional. For me as a reader, as an adult, I found myself wanting to dive into that book with my lightsaber, and we'll explain that in a moment, with my Princess Leia, braids on, to try and protect that poor child who was living in that, space of conflict, of emotional volatility, never knew what was coming. There was sort of a tornado of emotion going on in those divided households. And yet you couldn't, right? You can't protect that child. And so I wonder, as you wrote the book, you now mentioned that you started writing it so long ago. Was this a cathartic exercise for you when it started and it's turned into more? Or what was the basis for writing the book?
that's exactly what happened. The first draft in memoir writing is often known as the healing draft. And that's exactly what it was for me. So I was, 24 years old in 1998 when the memories of my childhood started really rushing back. And I was doing a lot of work on myself in therapy. And I was talking to my stepmother, who was a very helpful adult in the divorce situation for me. So the first draft of Love Wars was the healing draft. And then I came back to it many years later and actually rewrote the entire thing almost completely from scratch while living on a horse ranch in New Mexico in the summer of 2010. And that was the draft I then sent to Bill. And just to give your listeners the basic synopsis, the idea behind the book is to share my experience as a kid growing up in the middle of a high conflict divorce with two parents who both have high conflict personality traits, and how I not only survived, but overcame that. So it's kind of a hero's journey. And to riff off what you said about Princess Leia, there's a Star Wars theme throughout it. So I actually saw Star Wars in theaters at age 3. And so when my parents split up at age 6, I began to imagine their divorce war in my head as if it's Star Wars, as if I'm Luke Skywalker, and my Jedi mission is somehow I have to put an end to their divorce war, which lasted for 5 years. And so I grew up and I came of age from age 6 to 11 in the middle of their custody battle.
Let me add something that I think is real important. In rereading the book yesterday, which I've read probably a dozen times over the 15 years, I had forgotten about, at an early age, that you heard about the story of Anne Frank and that you had a dream about keep a diary of what's going on. This will help you survive. Something like that. Can you say a little, I don't remember what age you were, but that helped you fix things in your memory to then later put in the book.
Yeah, Bill, that's a great point. So I grew up with a lot of different Jewish cultural and religious education, which is a thread going throughout the whole book. And my parents actually fought about how much Jewish education I should receive. But reading Anne Frank's diary, I mean, that's a very kind of common experience. I think a lot of kids read that. And I internalized that as like, there's something about the idea of having a diary or a written record of my life that could help me. But of course, I was way too young and I was scared. And I was like, if I write down on a piece of paper right now at age 6 or 7 or 8, what mom and dad are doing, they could find that and get really angry at me. So I actually didn't write that stuff down at that time. But by the time I was like 9 years old, building on this, I actually read a Judy Blume novel about a divorce. And it was a novel about a low conflict divorce. And then I just made this decision and it kind of stuck with me. Someday I have to share this story. And so it was an internalized dream that I finally made come true in my 20s, starting in my 20s when I finally started writing about it.
Yeah, I think it's amazing because what so excites me about this story, and I agree with Susan that it's a tragic story. So it's not easy to read emotionally, but it's real easy to read as a story because it just flows and like, what happens next? What happens next? And this poor 5-6-year-old boy going through this without any help. And so what I think is so helpful about this is being able to see inside the family, because as a professional, and as a lawyer, I've argued many high conflict cases. I've represented mom about half the cases, dad about half the cases, domestic violence cases, child sexual abuse cases. But one of the biggest things is the child's resistance to being with a parent, which is a theme that comes out in the book. And why? And people go to court and argue, well, dad must have done something to make the child want to avoid him, or mom must have, alienated the child against dad. Well, in this story, there's actually both that estrangement and alienation because the child, basically being Matthew, it's hard to talk. It's almost like the other Matthew.
The other Matthew, exactly.
Little Matthew.
Luke Matthew.
Yeah.
I call him young Matthew. So like that's
There
my
you go.
internalized way of looking at it
There
as
we
young
go.
Matthew.
I'll
We
talk
will as
about
well.
young Matthew. Yeah. That young Matthew is experiencing and being bombarded with all these emotions, but also all these stories about the other parent. And let me tell you about your father and what a cretin he is. And that mom feels like she has to tell you that you won't survive if you don't know how 100% awful your father is. And then your father's saying, your mother's a lunatic. You know what she did yesterday? And I remember reading how each one, as you're spending more hours with them, you start absorbing their view of the other person, and you start thinking, is my father really this evil person? Is my mother really this lunatic? And that a child can't resist absorbing their parents' story and emotions. And I think that's so important message coming out of this, that children can't handle this intensity. They don't have the mechanism. They don't have what we call emotion regulation. And in this case, you've got the parents, especially mom, dysregulated, and child just automatically absorbing and going back and forth like a ping pong ball. And I think this is, to me, one of the most important themes of the book for parents and professionals to know. You've got to emotionally protect children from the intensity of a high conflict divorce. And I tell judges, I say, have the parents tell you 3 things they're doing to protect their child or children from their emotions during the divorce. Because this is such a driving factor in whether a child resists being around a parent, and frankly, in a child's development. Fortunately, Matthew developed some coping mechanisms that really helped.
All by himself, self-preservation. You're talking about both parents sort of loosing their emotions about the other parent to this young child. There's a scene where your mom was, felt that you needed to hear how horrible your father had been, that you would, Bill just said you wouldn't survive. You have to come back here, sit down and listen to this. But one of the things that, a little later in the book, because that was a constant theme, right? Everybody bringing their emotions and dumping on this poor young child. But there's one scene where everybody was doing that. And you, the child, yelled out, "Can't you see what's doing this? Stop it right now. Can't you see what this is doing to me?" And they stopped. And you described so eloquently that you feel like you were finally heard. And then they started up again and just completely, you were emotionally pushed aside. And it's, that's one of those moments that's just so hard to read in that book, because I can feel you thinking, oh, maybe I've finally broken through. And then it just goes back to the utter chaos. And I wonder what that had to have felt like for a child, and even now as an adult looking back on that.
Yeah, that exact moment you mentioned was one of the hardest and most painful moments of my childhood and in the book, because I was just kind of going into various sort of fantasies and reaching and grasping for how do I just break through this intensity merged with insanity. I was trying to find a way to break that, and those two energy fields, intensity merged with, frankly, insanity is one way to characterize when you have two high conflict individuals who are just feeding off each other. And I was not able to break through that in that moment. And so that was a really painful thing. And I did want to share kind of a happy moment in my life recently related to this book, which is that I know a couple, and I'm not going to say what their names are, but I know a couple who have some kids and they're still together, but their relationship has been extremely challenged. And there's been a lot of high conflict stuff going on in their relationship. And this couple, by themselves, without the kids present, listened to my audiobook and it had a disruptive effect for them where they said, we don't want to end up like this. And we love our kids so much that we got to find a way to work out our relationship. Thank you. Yeah. And so that's really, thank you. And that's one of the things I want to say, because on one hand, the book is there. The reason I wrote this book is primarily for the kid who I was, because I didn't have a book like this. And I want kids now to have a book like this so that they can feel not alone and they can feel seen if they're in high conflict situations. But another reason this book exists is to be a cautionary tale, because I think sometimes it's possible for people who are high conflict to receive an intervention if it's not critical of them personally. If it's not saying, hey, this is your behavior, it's an example of something else, and they can just pause and reflect on it without it being critical of them. Because, you saw in my book, my parents were so defensive and blaming. So I love the term you came up with, Bill, persuasive blamer, right? So that's an example, that really helped me think about both my mom and dad both were doing this persuasive blaming thing, and they weren't stopping and thinking about their own behavior. They weren't taking that moment for self-insight or self-reflection. And so I'm hoping this book can be useful for some people to gain some self-insights.
Yeah, I want to reinforce that. I see three main audiences for this book, and one of them is parents themselves going through this. And I like what you said, because they don't have to feel criticized. They can see, oh, yeah, maybe I do some of that. Okay, I'm going to back off of doing some of that. That it's a non-defensive way to learn what their own kids may be feeling inside. Also for professionals, because, that's most of my work is teaching professionals how to help people going through divorce, to help lower the conflict, to give skills for managing and all of that, but to see what the child's experiencing. Because in court, we're just guessing at what the children are going through. Your Honor, I'm sure, mom or dad is telling the child to hate the other parent. But I'm not sure, because I don't really know, because I'm not there, I haven't seen it, haven't read it. But reading what you have is what's really being gone through by young Matthew. And to be able to say, this is what the child's probably experiencing. And it isn't all or nothing. It isn't all mom, all dad, all good, all bad. Part of what the book shows is how ambivalent you felt about both of them. And that what we know is real human relationships are ambivalent. There's always things we wish the other person would do different and stuff. But in some of our high conflict cases, children absorb one side, so to speak, and have a pure negative view of the other parent, which you can only have from another person, not from your own experience. And so I think it's important for courts and lawyers and therapists and mediators to see what's really going on inside. But of course, maybe the most important audience, as you mentioned, may be, I think, teenagers, because they can read this. I don't know if 6-year-olds can read this, maybe 10-year-olds, to be able to see that they're not alone. Because I think so many kids are the only child or just one of two children. And it does feel like you're all alone. And that's, I think, got to be one of the worst things of all.
What I did during the development of this book was I shared the manuscript in progress with a pretty wide range of kids and parents and teachers. And so the youngest readers that I've had are 9. So I had a 9-year-old.
You were very close.
And it was interesting because what he said was his parents are together, happy family. His mom was kind of interacting with him while he read it. But he said it helped him understand what a friend of his was going through. So that's a big also thing, is to kind of spread this for kids, for everyone to start having more awareness of the different kinds of lives people live. And I also wanted to tear off something you said, Bill, about kind of how courts are perceiving kids' experiences or what they do know or don't know. I felt very isolated by the time I was 10 and 11 and I was going into court situations where there were custody questions, because when I was interacting with a wide range of mental health and legal professionals and the judge and all of that. I knew at that age that none of them had any idea at all what was really happening. And this is something that you talk about, Bill, that I think is so crucial, is that certain high conflict personalities and people who are on the NPD or BPD spectrum, they can sometimes present a certain face to the world and be doing and saying things behind closed doors that no one could even possibly guess a human is even capable of, right? No one would guess that my mother was, screaming at the top of her lungs, "I wish I'd never given birth to you," just shortly before she went to court to try to get custody over me, right? And that's what she said to me the day that I told her I wanted to live with my dad. And it was like, okay, wait, I'm just trying to have a conversation about what I want. I was trying to actually be calm and reasonable in expressing my personal preferences. And her response was to scream this completely bonkers, really abusive thing at me, right? So I'm hoping that there will be a kind of an opening of the door for people to have more insights, as you were saying, Bill, about what's really going on behind the scenes for kids.
And to entertain the possibility that it's not what you think it is, to really find out what's really going on, and also what can help this child cope.
That's what I wanted to ask about, Bill, because one of the things that really jumped out at me in reading the book is we have a very young child, right? Matthew, you were from age of 6 to 11 in this book. You're young. You're dealing with this. As you said, you felt very alone, very isolated. You had a younger brother, but your brother was clearly having a different experience of this situation than you were as well, which is not unusual either. Children can be bifurcated in the treatment they receive from parents. And you developed, what I'm going to call, and I'm not a therapist, but coping mechanisms, ways of dealing with the chaos around you. One of them that I saw, and I'll probably not phrase it properly, but you sort of just learned that you could shut down, not answer, not talk. It reminds me of when you were with that one therapist and you just decided, I'm just not going to talk to this therapist anymore. I'm not going to give them any more information. And you just sat, I think it was in the sandbox for the rest of the sessions until she just said, there's nothing I can do here. And I'm wondering, Bill and or Matthew, either one of you, what sort of coping mechanisms can a child of that age caught in that emotional tornado actually do when there are no adults there helping them?
Well, I'll just say from what I've seen as a child therapist, because I've worked with kids this young also, in divorce situations, in abuse situations, etc. And at that age, they're not usually aware of coping mechanisms and are more automatic in their responses. And I think shutting down is one of our automatic brain responses, fight, flight, or freeze. And that shutting down is basically when you feel you can't fight or flee. There's nothing left. And it's a sad story to know that interacting with professionals could be so traumatic that's the only option that you have, that you're feeling completely trapped, which to me is a lesson for professionals in how we listen and how we don't discount a child's experience and how we can empathize with the child, but also how important it is to give them something they can take with them. And I think it's fascinating how Star Wars and Luke Skywalker and the Death Star, the divorce Death Star, and how to stop that became a coping mechanism, which was brilliant. And I'm just thinking, I wonder how many kids, there was a movie they saw early on and that they applied, that was the only source of a coping mechanism. And that kids especially, but adults too, need something they can take with them when they leave the office and go back into the battle zone or whatever to help them cope. And I just think that really helped. But shutting down is a psychological automatic method when there's no place else to go.
Well, and Matthew, one of the other things I think that you did, and I was sort of cheering for you in the book as you're reading it. You know, there would be times when it was supposed to be your time with your dad, but your mom would have done something to thwart that happening. And so you made your own separate plans, say for dad to pick you up at school or dad to pick you up at your friend next door. And there was also sort of I'm going to do and make what I want to happen, knowing that there were going to be consequences later. Your mom was pretty consistent, and there are consequences when you don't fit into what she wanted. So, and I wonder if that was just another way of trying to bring order to your world at a time when you had very little control, and the adults really control, and especially your mother, it felt like, had a lot of control over where you were going to be, what you were going to do, what you were going to say, who you were going to see.
Yeah. So I wanted to just briefly circle back to something Bill said, and then I'll address that, Susan. In the discussion about, therapists and divorce professionals, mental health professionals interacting with kids, speaking as, someone who was in that position as young Matthew, what I would have appreciated a lot more was much more listening and much more empathy, right? Because most of the mental health professionals were coming into our world with agendas, preset ideas, preconceived notions. They were clearly trying to fit me into the box of whatever was going to happen according to this thing that had nothing to do with really deeply just being and relating to me. So if there are professionals listening, I would say, I would have, just if this is representative, I would have appreciated much more listening and empathy, because that might have unlocked something meaningful in the therapist actually getting what was really going on with me, which didn't happen. I think Susan, the situations you were talking about, what I was seeking was something that I would just call care, sanity, and calmness. I wouldn't say order. I think I was seeking care, sanity. Like I was kind of seeking I knew, this is, and we're talking about coping. I think this is a really big point that I want to emphasize. I had many experiences of going to friends' houses and seeing friends' parents who were pretty nice people. And I'd be like, okay, how do I find that in my life? Okay. So some of the coping for me was going to environments that were calm and nice. And I actually didn't get into that very much in my book because there's only so many words, so many pages, and I didn't want to distract from the main theme. But I could have, written much more about things I was actually doing throughout my childhood to find solaces, okay, away from what was going on with my mother and my father. And so this is where maybe it's a good time to mention my stepmother, Holly, in the book, because she's the one consistently sane adult throughout the entire book and throughout my childhood, right? So I wanted to really give her a shout out. She was amazing because, she got involved with my dad, and then suddenly there's all this craziness going on. And Bill, you weren't on the scene in the mid 1980s with a book, right? There was no splitting back then, but she instinctually was doing things to try to calm things down. And you can see scenes throughout the book where she's saying to my dad, hey, how can you, de-escalate with Vanessa, with my mother, his ex-wife? How can you not have Matthew so involved? And it didn't always work. There's moments where dad is you can almost see him, I'm kind of going to make a joke, falling off the wagon, where he's going right back into his conflicts with my mother. But over the course of the book, dad's conflict levels go down because Holly is a positive influence on him. Okay. And so that's a really important point I want to bring out to everybody, is that, Bill, I've noticed you've said in your work, generally speaking, high conflict individuals generally don't change over time. A lot of that stuff can be very consistent. What I believe is also possible, at least from my experience, is sometimes if a person has a relationship of any kind with the high conflict individual, sometimes lower, calmer approaches can kind of rub off on them a bit, and that can actually help. So I did want to mention that and see if either of you had any reflections on the Holly character.
Yeah, I do.
Well, I loved Holly. Yay, Holly.
It's really interesting. You never quite know who's going to be the responsible adult in the room in a high conflict divorce. From my experience and polls I take of professionals, about half of high conflict divorces have two high conflict parents. And about half have one, and the other person's trying to cope and trying this, trying that, and very open to suggestions. But even people with personality disorders often calm down in a secure relationship that's reasonable. And I think that, I don't know whether or not your dad had a personality disorder. I can't say whether your mom had a personality disorder. I haven't interviewed them to make clinical decisions. But some people with personality disorders, including borderline personality disorder, calm down in a secure, stable relationship with a reasonable person. So I don't know, maybe your dad had a personality disorder and Holly helped him calm down and feel secure. Or maybe he didn't really have a high conflict personality and was mirroring your mother, who was the more angry and yelling, screaming person. But in either case, having Holly helped him, but also having Holly really helped you. And
Yes.
What I find in some families, it's grandmom. In some families, it's Uncle Fred. It's really so helpful when there's somebody like that who's a reasonable person, who just calms the fight and reinforces, as I'm not sure who said this early on, but as an emotional friend, that you need to have an emotional friend. Ideally, in some situations, that's a child therapist. I remember when I was doing child and family counseling and I'd meet with like teenagers and they'd say, Bill, can I live with you? and like that wasn't the goal, but I could certainly empathize with them because it was so upsetting everywhere. So having one person that really understands, and for professionals and people going through divorce, think about trying to be that person who's flexible, understanding, open, non-judgmental, an emotional friend, and that you can be that as a parent, as a step-parent, as a grandparent, etc. And that's so important for children to have. So I just think it was like the book was getting hopeless and then Holly showed up. And it's like...
And started knitting mittens,
Yeah.
And making good dinners.
Right.
You just wanted to hug her. But so you had Holly, and she played, she is that character, the one who you want to reach through and hug. But then you also saw another dynamic that I can say I have seen play out in many of the cases where I've been involved and there's been high conflict behaviors, and that is enablers, or the family members or friends and others who support the high conflict behavior, in fact, exacerbated in some circumstances. Right. And Matthew, you definitely, I think, had that happening in spades, as we could say. It was happening quite a bit in more, I would say, with your mother's family. In fact, your grandparents took you for a couple of weeks to try and convince you to, take a certain course of action. And one of the most touching moments, if I can say, that I found in the book was the conversation you had with your grandmother at the end of the book, where she acknowledged that she hadn't really thought about how this was affecting her grandchild. She was thinking about how it was affecting her child, who was your mother. I thought the book did a very good job of showing what that feels like, having that support system for the person who's exhibiting those high conflict behaviors, and then people supporting that, it almost, betrayal's not the right word, but it almost feels like you're getting ganged up on, or I would imagine it did.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one scene in the book where I walk into a courtroom in the middle of the divorce war, and I said something like, and I saw dozens and dozens of adult eyes on me. So it throughout my whole childhood, I felt like either everybody is watching me or everybody is ganging up on me, and there's almost no one who's just like purely just cares about me and just wants me to have a good childhood. And like that one person who I like actually had a consistently good benevolent motive was Holly, and everyone else was compromised on one level or another by some sort of, I think, kind of blindness and distortion field. And I think you're getting into that distortion field, Susan. Some of it is, my mother's parents. It's almost like, well, of course you would sort of predict that if mom is a high conflict personality who has BPD traits, which for me is very clear. I went very far down the rabbit hole in understanding my mom. And it's like, yes, that she was that. And knowing what I know of her childhood, and some of that's in the book, of course, her parents were sort of funding and fueling her divorce war against my dad, right? Like literally funding, the attorneys and all that. Like they were behind the whole thing. But what was really fascinating, this is a term, I don't know if you coined this term, Bill, maybe you did, but it's like, it's just so perfect that's in your book, Splitting, is enrolling negative advocates. If that's your idea, it's like, you got it, because that's what my mother did. Especially with, so she had two different boyfriends who came in, she brought in throughout the book. The first one, Bob Trapp, kind of a cowboy guy. You'll read about him, but the second one is Bob Trapp was all over the map, but Gordon, her second boyfriend, he seemed so nice and he was so reasonable and he's out playing basketball with me. And he's actually a very calm guy. And I really liked him. And then all of a sudden he's cornering me and it's as if my mother's voice is coming through his mouth.
Yeah.
And that was really, so Bill, what did you think of that moment with Gordon being a negative advocate for my mother? What was that like for you?
Oh, yeah. No, I thought, that's part of why I think your story is so helpful, because it's the inside story of these things I observe from the outside. So yes, I'm pleased to say, in a sense, that negative advocate is the term I coined, going from mental health, seeing enablers, codependents, into the legal system where everybody has advocates. And I saw, well, wait, these are negative advocates. And lawyers sometimes, therapists sometimes, family members sometimes. In your case, you had kind of a stack of them all bombarding you. Like you said, a negative advocate in many ways is speaking for the high conflict person, but they don't really know what's going on. They've just absorbed the emotions and now they really want to. And I've been in court where people's new boyfriends and girlfriends come up to me and say, Bill, you don't understand, my girlfriend or boyfriend. And it's like, yes, I do. I've spent 5 years in court with them, and you're just here for a year and you'll be gone and the next negative advocate will be here.
Matthew had that conversation with Gordon in the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And so to me, it was like, oh, of course. But what's interesting is some people don't become negative advocates. And I think Holly's a good example of that. She had the ability to stay neutral, to stay out of the divorce war and be a human being who cared and listened and had wisdom to share. And so people can choose to be negative advocates or not. Mostly they do it automatically, but they can choose to not slip into that role. And they have to think about that. So, yeah, I think, the grandparents, at least on your mother's side, were negative advocates. The lawyer, people have to be aware of that. Otherwise, they just go, oh, well, this person's acting this way. No, this is the pattern of behavior around a high conflict person is predictable. And there may be two high conflict people, but there's always a target of blame and there's always negative advocates. And people have to be careful not to slip into those roles.
Well, and you mentioned the target of blame. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting and also just, really hit home was that Matthew made it very clear that for most of the time, his father was his mother's target of blame. But at times it shifted to being Matthew. Right. And Matthew became the target of blame. And that, it's almost like dad got pushed aside, like he doesn't even exist in this story anymore. And it's, the focus of her ire was this 9-10-year-old boy. And then it would shift back to his dad and back and forth. But I found that because I think of a target of blame, and I think of it as being that ex-spouse or the former partner. And I had not thought of this as something that shifted it in the dynamic and could shift to the child, but very clearly did there.
I'd like to just tear off that to Bill's book. So this is why I want everybody, if you feel at all inspired to pick up my book, Love Wars, I want you to pick up Bill's book, Splitting, at the same time, because this is actually the headline topic of Splitting, if I'm getting this right, Bill, which is splitting someone into all good or all bad. So the book starts with, my experience of mom and dad are suddenly they're splitting each other into all bad. Okay, but they had loved each other. They'd been in love with each other and idealized each other just a few years before that. So they're splitting each other as all bad while they're pulling me apart in a tug of war. And then by the end of and then mom goes through splitting against multiple boyfriends, right? Where suddenly they're great and then she hates them and they're terrible. And there's a moment where I say in the book, and then who's next? She's going to split next? And sure enough, she starts splitting me. One moment I say something to her, and I'm starting to become an actor because I realize if I don't say or do the right thing, she's going to scream at me. So I'm saying things that are somewhat pretend to get her to say that I'm the best son because I don't want to be in her doghouse. And so she starts splitting me as all good, but eventually, when I tell her I want to live with my dad, she's splitting me as all bad. So I just found it really interesting that topic is so important. And I think it's a great title for your book, Bill.
Well, thank you. Let me mention, because the title is actually it's a three-way pun if you know enough. So people think of splitting as like we're splitting up. So there's that. Then splitting property. But the psychological splitting you're talking about, it's important to understand. It tends to be associated with borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. And what it is they really have an incapability of seeing gray areas. And so all good or all bad. Many people with borderline personality disorder see themselves as all good one day and all bad the next day. And they see the people around them. So like dad's all good for, I think he got about 5 years of being all good. And then around when you were 5, they started fighting. And by 6, they split up. And now he's all bad, like 110% all bad. And what's interesting is that concept, all good and all bad, split you and your brother. In other words, your brother was the all good child and you were the all bad child. And when I worked in child and family therapy, I had several cases like that. And it always was a parent with borderline or narcissistic personality traits. I don't know if there's a disorder here, but those traits. And it's a psychological concept that the person is totally unaware of. What's good is we have treatments today, and like DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, has really helped a lot of people with these kinds of issues get more balanced and more gray areas in their life. And so, I think to myself, what if the judge ordered your parents into like DBT or something like that? And I've had cases recently where judges have ordered like a parent get dialectical behavior therapy for borderline traits. And there's so much hope here, I guess I want to say, that what your book opens up is understanding the dynamics and exposing it. It's not secret anymore. This is exposed, and we can treat what we know. We can't treat what we don't know, but we can treat what we know. And I think you really opened the door to a lot of potential for learning here. But that dynamic, the splitting, and especially between you and your brother, I don't know if you want to mention that, but that's a dynamic with parents like this that it makes it really hard for siblings to even support each other.
So I just wanted to address something you said a little earlier, Bill, and then I'll talk about the siblings. I did want to share the cautionary note about the idea of judges ordering people like my parents into DBT. It's a wonderful idea, and I had many thoughts like that. Actually, I became aware of DBT, at some point over the past decades, and I sat down with my mom before she passed away, and the level of unwillingness to look at herself, do any therapy, do any self-awareness, it was so iron shut. So I do want to also share the cautionary note for people who are listening to this of just be aware that the people who are out there with these high conflict traits, if they're anything at all like my parents, and I'm just going to speak from my experience, if they're anything at all like my parents, the level of resistance and denial might be much higher than you could possibly imagine. Like the denial is going to just potential, and resistance and defensiveness might be so off the charts. Who knows which of them are going to actually really be like, okay, and how that intervention happens where, the judge sees what's really going on and orders it, or they become open to it. I don't know, but hopefully it will happen in some cases. With my brother, Bill, we were doing a presentation at the AFCC conference a few years ago before my book came out. And I remember the topic of our talk was anger is contagious. And there's a scene in my book where my mother has been screaming at me about how terrible my dad is. And she just goes off the charts, create nuts with her intensity about how horrible my dad is, splitting him to me, and I'm forced to listen to all of that. And then there's a scene where I just start bullying my brother, and I'm pretending to play a video game with him. I pretend to play a boxing video game with him, but then I start punching him for real. And we were little kids, but yet those, like, that level of emotional scarring is very real for kids when they get bullied, and it's something I deeply regret. I apologize to him as an adult. And part of why I'm sharing this is to let everyone know, hey, I am aware that I'm a flawed protagonist in this book, and I want people to be able to see in the stories that that there is a transmission of emotional pain that can just get passed down through the kids, and then causes. I'm not sure what you had in mind here, Bill, for the sibling relationship, but there was a split between me and my brother where we started to grow apart because we didn't have, we ultimately, as the story evolves, instead of becoming allies in this situation, I was chosen to be the lightning rod. And I think there are a lot of divorces like this where like one kid becomes the focal point for a lot of the energy. And then I think you've used the term, Bill, if I remember correctly, rigidly neutral. Like you'll have a kid who becomes rigidly neutral and they don't want to take sides. And they're just trying to.
Yes, Switzerland, the child who is Switzerland.
Right.
Yeah. And my little brother, Thomas, very understandably was trying to be the Switzerland. He was trying to be neutral. He was trying to stay out of the whole thing. And because he was trying to stay out of it, whereas I was trying to become a hero and find a way to kind of both escape the bad situation, but also put an end to the divorce war, we were not aligned. And then I had no emotional outlet for all the pain I was experiencing because I didn't have any good therapy. So unfortunately and tragically, and I very much regret this, I bullied my brother. So Bill, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about the sibling material.
Just that's almost automatic. Because you're absorbing the split of all good and all bad that starts in the mind of someone with one of these problems. And children don't have the insulation. That's, we talk about as adults about emotion regulation and dysregulation. That's something that's learned, and kids haven't learned it yet, how to not absorb the emotions coming at them. And especially if you get high conflict emotions coming at you, it's so automatic that those just get transferred. You end up kicking the dog, or I don't know if Thomas ever kicked the dog, but it just transfers.
We didn't do that. That's like, I didn't do that. I regret what I did to Thomas, but I didn't kick any dogs.
Although I didn't enjoy the ending of either of the dogs in the book either. I'm a dog lover, and I'm like, they took your
Yeah.
dog away from you. That felt like child abuse to me. And then your other dog, unfortunately, had an unfortunate accident. So I was like, this is more negative outflow. But I thought the relationship with your brother seemed, you talked about being the lightning rod, but you were also, you were the child who your mother had stand in as her date to go to square dancing. She was the one who, you were the one that she wanted to sit down and have the heart to heart talks with and share the things with you that adults probably don't need to share with their children and all that. But when you started to become the child who was the out child, who was now the all bad child, that's when your brother sort of shifted in her treatment, at least through the book, to being the golden child. The rest of the time I felt like, and maybe it's just because of your experience of it, is he was not there. He was sort of a non-existent child in the story, but then he became a focal point when she wanted to otherwise emphasize that you no longer were.
I didn't focus intensively on my relationship with my brother throughout the story, given page count, word constraints. Sure. I wanted to keep the focus on the kids' experience of the divorce war as a theme and just give the basic understanding of the relationship between me and my brother. And it becomes more, you'll notice in the book, there's more about my relationship with my friends. And that's because I was spending much more time with my brother was 3 years younger. So I was out, having wild adventures with my friends a few times because they were kind of a more consistent part of my experience at that time. But I also wanted to express, here's how Thomas was relating to the divorce and how we completely changed our, we had different approaches to the divorce where I had no choice but to be in the middle. So all the energy's on me. He's trying to stay out of it. And that's why he's not in the main story very much, is because neither of my parents were focusing, the majority of their energy on him and what they wanted out of him, where they were focusing that on me.
Well, and that's that. I won't spoil how the book plays out in the end. There's some twists and turns in that relationship. And as the book plays out, I will say, it ended, I thought you did a wonderful job sort of wrapping the book up, finding what felt like, at least to a reader, just, moments of peace for yourself, moments of being able to forgive some of what you had been put through with the main players. You had some conversations with your mom. You had a conversation I thought was very touching between your father and your mother that you facilitated. And the book for me ended on a positive note of seeing how, even having gone through all that you've gone through, you're able to come sit here, be with us today, and have been able to put that type of introspection onto your life experience and to have learned from it clearly yourself, but also to be able to share it so eloquently to help others, which it's very clearly going to do. It's changed. I'm a practitioner. It's changed Bill's books changed me, changed how I practice. This will change how I practice as a practitioner as well. So it truly an opus, something that starts in one place. I have to say, so you said earlier where your parents are playing tug of war of you. The book literally starts with, we see that parents playing tug of war over children. We use that metaphor all the time. The book literally starts with your parents pulling you apart physically, one with each of the arms, pulling on you, trying to pull you in two different directions. Bill, when you saw the manuscript, you had to know where this was going from page one.
Yeah. I mean, I really think this is that inside story that's been missing, that we hear from professionals, we hear from people, parents going through the divorce. Many parents have written books about their divorces. Many divorced parents became therapists and lawyers, but we haven't heard the child's experience. And this really, I think, is eye-opening. And while you said it was uncomfortable, Susan, I think it's a mix of uncomfortable, and the way it ends is very touching. I think I think throughout that it's a touching book because it does touch you emotionally. But I think it's so powerful because it isn't just a downer. It's looking at what's real and then looking at how you can come out of that. And that's what's great about here you are 26 years later, having written about all of this experience and sharing it with other people. And I think that's a real sign of health and success. So good for you. And congratulations on getting it to this point, because I've known you as you've been working on it, and I want to give you a lot of credit for persistence. You stuck with it.
Nothing easy about writing a book, and certainly not one that is that personal. So let's make sure, because you've made it available not only as a book, but in another, I think, very impactful format as well. So can you share with everyone how to get the book, where the book is, and the audio version, which I think will be very interesting to people?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Susan and Bill. It's just such a pleasure to talk to you about this. So Love Wars: Clash of the Parents, a true divorce story, is available in hardcover, ebook, and dramatized audiobook versions. The audiobook is fully dramatized by a full cast from the Story Circle is who created it. You can find the book at lovewars.com. Again, that's lovewars.com. And I just want to wrap with a very quick anecdote about like what this means to me and why I wrote this book. I did some video interviews with young readers who read the manuscript before it was published. And there was a young teenager, and this is what she said. She said, honestly, I read the book while I was listening to my parents fighting in the other room. So I get exactly where Matthew is coming from. It's crazy. It's a true story. That's what happened to me. And I found the book empowering. So my approach is empowering kids. That's the point of the book, is to empower kids, because that's what I wanted and did not have when I was growing up in a divorce war. I did not have a book to read that empowered me. So I think, Bill, your book Splitting is very empowering for adults who need a therapeutic perspective. And I think primarily Love Wars is empowering for kids, but hopefully it's also a cautionary tale and just an engaging read for adults.
I agree. So you can get the book at lovewars.com. Can you also get the audio version, the reading, the dramatic reading version through the website?
Yeah, so the website, lovewars.com, has links to where you can buy it. And it's available on Amazon, Audible, on Kobo, on Libro.fm, on Apple Books, like all the different platforms basically have it. But the links are at lovewars.com. So just go there, then click the link to whatever retailer where you want to buy it.
Well, and I will have a link to that in the show notes. I will also, because I agree with what you said, Matthew, I think if you pick up Love Wars, pick up Splitting as well. I think that the two of them go together, and maybe not if you're a child. Splitting may not be, but if you are a practitioner, you should have this on your bookshelf anyway. But if you are a parent who is going through a high conflict divorce, if you have an interest in the topic, I think it will help the messaging and the story that Matthew tells so eloquently resonate even more if you have it to work with, Bill. In fact, what I have decided that I am going to do is I am going to re-air Bill's Splitting episode, and then I will have your episode come right after it, Matthew, so that listeners, because it's been probably, I think, 3 or 4 years, Bill, since we did Splitting together. So I think I'm going to re-air that, and then again, #1 episode on the podcast, but I think we'll bring it back for people and then follow right up with Love Wars. Very important. And all of Bill's books. If you go to divorceandbeyondpod.com, all of his books are on my resource page. You can also go to highconflictinstitute.com, and I think they're all also available on Amazon and other booksellers, right, Bill?
Independent bookstores everywhere. Yep.
Don't forget to get Biff as well. And all the Biffs are fabulous. I love my Biffs. Bullies, Adult Bullies, that's another great one. There's so many wonderful resources. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking this time with me. Matthew, thank you for your, truly your journey of writing this book and bringing this to the world, because I agree with Bill. As a practitioner, the thing that was missing before Bill started writing his books was, that practical and practitioner aspect of what was happening. But what we've never had before is really that inside view of what this looks like for children. And as I said, it will change how I practice, just as Bill's books changed how I practiced as well. So thank you both very much.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Bill.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a few golden nuggets from this incredibly important conversation. First, children absorb everything. As Matthew shared so vividly, kids in high conflict homes take in the emotional intensity around them, even when adults think they are shielding them. They carry the stories, the blame, and the fear inside their bodies. They do not have the ability to regulate or make sense of what is happening. This is why your emotional management matters more than almost anything else during divorce. Second, parentification is real and deeply damaging. Matthew's mother used him as an emotional confidant, a messenger, and at times even a stand-in partner. Bill underscored that children cannot handle this role. When parents unload their pain, anger, or fears onto a child, it pulls them out of childhood and forces them into the adult positions they were never meant to fill. Third, a stable adult can change a child's world. Holly, Matthew's stepmother, is a powerful reminder that one consistent, calm, emotionally safe adult can provide a lifeline. Whether you are the parent, a step-parent, a grandparent, or any trusted figure, your steadiness and empathy can make all the difference for a child in a chaotic system. Finally, emotional reactivity drives the conflict. Bill helped us to see how volatility, unpredictable reactions, and splitting behaviors create confusion and fear for kids. But he also reminded us that you can interrupt the cycle. You can lower the temperature, create predictability, and focus on what your child needs to feel safe. These are the choices that protect your children and change their trajectory. Matthew, thank you for your courage in bringing this story forward and giving us a rare look inside the child's experience. And Bill, as always, thank you for your wisdom and for helping us understand what these patterns look like and what parents can do to shift them. And to all of you listening, remember that children do not need perfection. They need protection, predictability, and a commitment to rise above the conflict. Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and I'll see you next week on Divorce and Beyond.
Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.